The wind that night carried no mercy. It howled across the endless white plains like a spirit that had forgotten warmth. Snow blanketed the ridges of Arizona's high desert, turning the land into a pale, silent grave of winter. Cattle lay huddled against fence posts, their breath freezing in the air, and inside a small cabin of rough-cut pine, a lone rancher named Eli Turner sat by a dying fire. His eyes were hollow from the long season, the kind of eyes that had seen loss too often and learned not to talk about it. He stared at the embers, remembering the sound of his wife's voice, long gone, and the promises he never kept. The whiskey bottle beside him was near empty, the warmth inside his chest fading with it. The storm outside was cruel, and every gust seemed to whisper that come morning, the cold might take him too. Then through the roar of the wind came a sound he thought impossible, a faint cry, like the voice of a wounded spirit. Eli stood, steadying himself, listening. Again it came, softer but desperate, somewhere beyond the stable. He grabbed his lantern, wrapped himself in his old coat, and stepped out into the blizzard. The world outside bit into his skin like knives. Snow whipped across his face, filling the air with chaos. And every step he took sank deep into the white. He followed the sound, not sure if it was human beast or ghost, but something in him, that part which still refused to die, kept moving. He found her near the edge of the creek, a young Apache girl, no older than 20, her dark hair crusted with frost, her hands buried in the snow, as if she'd been crawling toward nowhere. She wasn't dressed for the storm, only wrapped in torn leather and thin cloth. Her skin was pale from the cold, her lips nearly blue. Eli knelt beside her, shaking the snow from her shoulders. She stirred weakly, whispering words in Apache he couldn't understand. He didn't think, he just lifted her, feeling how light she was, like the snow itself. The walk back to the cabin felt endless, his legs burning with each step, but he made it, slamming the door behind him as the wind screamed outside. He laid her near the fire and pulled every blanket he owned over her. Her pulse was faint but steady. When he tried to feed the fire, he realized the woodpile was near gone, just a few pieces left. The storm had cut off his supply, and the last log might not last till dawn. He cursed softly, looking at the girl again. Her eyes fluttered open, dark as the night, and for a moment they locked. She didn't speak, only watched him with quiet defiance, like she'd seen death before and refused to fear it. He offered her a cup of hot broth, but she shook her head slowly. Then with trembling hands, she pushed the blanket off and sat up. Her movements were calm, purposeful, almost strange. She went to the door, opened it just a crack, and let the freezing air rush in. Eli shouted, "You'll die out there!" But she didn't answer. She knelt at the doorway, scooped a handful of snow, and rubbed it across her arms and face. The rancher stared in disbelief. "What in God's name are you doing?" he asked. She turned her head slightly, her voice soft but steady. "You fight the cold with the cold," she said, her accent carrying the rhythm of the mountains. Then she sat near the window, away from the fire, breathing slow, her body still like stone. He thought she'd lost her mind, until hours passed, and she was still alive, still calm, her breath steady, while his own hands began to tremble from the chill. When morning came, the fire had died out, and yet she was the one who stood first. She stepped outside into the pale dawn, the snow still falling. Eli followed her, feeling weaker than he'd ever been. She knelt beside the frozen creek and began breaking the ice with a small stone, humming softly. Then she looked at him and said, "You build fire in your heart first, not in the wood." Her words struck him like truth spoken by the earth itself. She showed him how to pack snow inside a hide to insulate from the wind, how to find warmth in movement, in breath, in the will to live, rather than in the flame that burns out too soon. That day she taught him to survive, not just the cold outside, but the colder kind within a man's soul. Eli had spent years living with ghosts, the kind that linger when you stop caring. But watching her, this stranger who had slept in the snow without fire, he began to feel something shift deep within him, a strange mix of awe and shame. She was half his size, but stronger than he had ever been. By nightfall, the storm broke. The sky opened wide, spilling stars across the horizon, and the world went silent again. She sat near the door, her eyes lost somewhere beyond the hills. He asked her name, and she hesitated, then whispered, "Diana." He said it softly, like a prayer, feeling the weight of it. She looked at him with something unreadable, not trust, not fear, just quiet knowing. "You helped me," she said, "but you don't know what's coming." Eli frowned. "What do you mean?" But she didn't answer. Instead, she pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders and lay down beside the fire, closing her eyes. The rancher watched her in silence, the flames painting shadows across her face. Somewhere in that glow, he saw more than a stranger. He saw a spirit that had walked through pain and found strength in it. And though he didn't yet understand it, his life was about to change forever. Outside, the last snowflake fell against the frozen window pane and melted into nothing. Inside, Eli Turner, the man who'd forgotten how to live, finally felt the warmth of something he couldn't name. And as the night grew still, a new chapter of his life quietly began beside a girl who had survived the snow without fire.